So we've seen what are quantity contracts. Now we're going to talk about value contracts. So a quantity contract is a contract based on the total quantity that we are going to procure from a particular vendor. A value contract is based on a total value. So it's dollar, say 500,000 per year of what? You could list whatever you want depending on how much you negotiated. So for this amount of purchase, the vendor could offer $8.50 per pound of coffee, and some other price for flour, some other price for sugar, depending on his economics, right? And then you're going to consume this value contract through release orders, just like the way we have done it for quantity contracts. So let's create a value contract for 50,000 per year, and we can put in coffee at $8.50 per pound. And you could have more products if you want. And the way to do that is go to contract, create. Everything remains the same, except we are going to change the agreement type from a quantity contract to a value contract, like so. So this is a quantity contract, and this is a value contract. So select a value contract, and of course select vendor of 4001 and create OK. The validity is going to be for 1 year, and here we specify the target value. Now remember, target value is not at the line item level. It's including all the lines in the contract. So we're going to specify it at the header, not at the line item. With a quantity contract, we had to specify quantities at the line item level. 50,000 pounds of coffee, that means at the line item. Here, we are not specifying the value for a particular product. Instead, we are saying the total value that we are procuring is 500,000 USD. Now, in that 500,000, you could specify coffee beans, right, at say $8.50 per pound, right? Now remember, it's not asking you for the quantity because it doesn't care. You could procure as much quantity as you want, and the price is going to be $8.50 because the overall commitment is for buying $500,000 worth of coffee, flour, sugar, anything that you have negotiated with the vendor. Save it, and note down the value contract, right? If you don't want to note down, then what you can do is you can go to change or display mode, search for the contract by going here and putting in the vendor, right? 4001 US 01. And these are all the different contracts that we have, and you can specify the value contract. You can just double click it like so, right? Double click and hit enter, and you'll see the contract there. Now you want to release this contract, right, and create a PO. So go to follow on functions, click on contract release order, and instead of adopting this contract with the adopt button, you can also adopt the data by dragging and dropping into this basket. All right, and what's the quantity that I want to purchase? Say 100, and you see the price, $8.50. Now it's not just the price. Let me do something. Let me go back to that contract. Let me cancel this. Do you want to save it? No. And go to the contract in change mode, and at the header, click on this header. This is the header. At the header, I'm going to say the terms for this is not net 30, because we don't want to pay within 30 days. We want to pay, say, within uh, 60 days. Okay, we want to increase the amount of credit time that we are going to get. Instead of net 30, we're going to say net 60. Okay, so net 60 is our payment terms. Now by default, say it's net 30, meaning the default payment terms with the vendor 4001 is net 30. But in this contract, we want a little bit more leeway, more freedom. So say we have negotiated a payment terms of 60 days, meaning from the time we receive the invoice, we have 60 days to pay instead of 30. Now save it. If we create a purchase order with that vendor, a standalone purchase order without referring to this contract, what is the payment terms? So go create the purchase order with this vendor. And if you go to the document header and go to delivery invoice tab, what is the payment terms? 30. Where does this come from? This comes from the vendor. If you double click this vendor and go to the financial data, what is the payment term there? Net 30. So by default, when you create a purchase order, the terms could be payment terms, Incoterms, any of these conditions. They're typically defaulted from the vendor. If not, from the purchase info record. But when you refer a contract, you want to save it? No. Go to the contract and release with reference to that contract. And when you drag and drop this contract into the purchase order for a quantity of 100, say, now go to the header and see what the payment terms are. You see, the payment terms are 60, net 60. So what does this tell you? This should tell you that the terms that are negotiated with the vendor are not just the price. Like we discussed in one of the previous chapters, it could be payment terms, Incoterms, or any of the terms that dictate how that purchase order behaves. So let's continue with our release order. So we have a release order for 100 and save it. Now if you go back to the contract and look at the release documentation for that line item 10, see, a quantity of 100 has been released for the Chicago plant, company code US01, and the value for that is 850. So out of a total of 500,000, we have released a value of 850. Right? Where do you see the target quantity? Here. And where do you see the release quantity? In the release documentation at the line item level. So that is a value contract. So let's summarize what we have learned so far. We were talking about outline agreements. And we said there are two types of outline agreements. One is contracts. Another is scheduling agreements. In contracts, we have talked about a quantity contract and we have talked about a value contract. Now in the next chapter, we're going to talk about scheduling agreements.